Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery, BTR.org. I'm Anne. I'm sure you remember what it was like when you were searching for help, maybe for your husband, hoping to find the right program or therapist. That's why I started podcasting. I supported my husband through 7 years of pornography addiction recovery, and not one therapist during that time told me I was experiencing emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion. I didn't want any other woman on the planet to be in the dark. If you're like the majority of my listeners, you're experiencing the type of abuse that's invisible and difficult to wrap your head around. Your husband is using porn or having affairs or lying to you, and you're getting the same bad advice about how to improve communication or your relationship. If you need support from women who totally understand, check out our daily group session schedule at btr.org/group. We'd love to see you in a session today. One simple, anonymous way to help spread the word is to click, follow, or subscribe to the Betrayal Trauma Recovery podcast on your favorite podcasting app. While you're there, every 5-star rating helps make this podcast more visible and will help save other women from getting the wrong kind of help, like a couple program that will make this type of abuse worse. For those of you who follow or subscribe to this podcast, thank you so much. Your support means so much to me. Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery. This is Anne. I'm so excited to have Natalie Hoffman on today's episode. She's the host of the Flying Free podcast, which is a podcast dedicated to teaching women about emotional and spiritual abuse. She's also the author of All the Scary Little Gods, and I'm so excited to have her on today. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
You're amazing. I've always appreciated your work, especially all the really interesting and just fascinating deconstruction that you do with spiritual abuse. I love it. You're so smart, and it's fun to have you here. Let's start out by talking about your new book, All the Scary Little Gods.
I wanted to tell my story. The reason why is because I wanted to help women who were stuck in fundamentalist programming, who maybe weren't able to read or had the capacity or the interest in reading a scholarly type or a nonfiction book about deprogramming. In fact, that might even scare them off a little bit, but they might want to read a story about it. So instead of telling people how to walk this journey, do step 1, 2, and 3, I wanted to show them what a potential journey of deprogramming and deconstructing might look like, especially for women who weren't ready to give up their faith, but really wanted to figure out how their faith aligned with goodness and love and their core values. I think it was like the English teacher in me saying, show, don't tell.
I loved that it felt so honest. You are expressing that inner dialogue, helping women know you're not crazy. Everybody thinks these things.
Yes, exactly. The first part I wrote from my younger self. So you kind of hear about my childhood from that perspective. And it can be kind of humorous because as adults reading it, we can see what's going on, but the child is clueless. And then there's a lot of arguing and disagreement inside of me throughout part 2 as to what is the best course of action in any given situation. I was in a very religious environment that was very oppressive, but I had bought into it hook, line, and sinker because I grew up in an environment like that. Fortunately, I kept journals. And when I was reading through them, I could hear the arguments inside of me. Part of me would be arguing in my journal and thinking one way, and then another part of me would be thinking a different way. And so I just started listening to those parts of me and figuring out, like, what were their concerns? I had a lot of different kinds of concerns that almost were contradictory in many ways. I think a lot of us do. A lot of us have conflicting thoughts inside of us. And then we think, am I schizophrenic? Am I crazy? What is my problem? Why do I know one thing with my head? But then on the other hand, I keep making these other decisions over here and I can't seem to get any traction in my life.
Can you talk about those concepts of deprogramming and also figuring out for yourself if faith is right for you?
I feel like it's a very individual process. If I was to say, oh, well, my path led me down this road and I kept my Christian faith, and so therefore that's the right way, then all I'm doing is just repeating what I grew up with. And so I think giving yourself freedom to sift through the beliefs that you maybe have and decide which ones have served you in your life and have served the people around you, and actually align with what you choose to believe about a creator God, or however you want to describe that God, and which ones don't. Because for me, I kind of boiled it down to love. And when I looked at the life of Jesus Christ and what he represented, I decided that he represented love, and he was a deconstructionist too. So when we deconstruct, I feel like we're really walking in the footsteps of Jesus as well. Whether we align ourselves with him or not, that's what we're doing. And so I decided that for me, love was the bottom line. And what about my faith was actually expansive or expanding love in my own life for myself first, and then for my family, and then for those around me into the world, and what things were actually fostering more oppression, more abuse, more control and power over systems. And I realized that a lot of what I believed was actually the opposite of love. And I needed to eliminate those things from my own life, and also open myself up to my children walking through a path. And some of them have decided that for right now in their lives, they had to walk away from their faith completely. And I don't have any fear about that anymore like I used to. But again, it's because of what I now believe about God. I was scared of God before, really, because the God that I worshiped was very little and very scary. And there was a lot of other little scary gods in my life that I really bowed down and worshiped and placated and catered to, that sort of represented that scary God. For me, I needed to get rid of that kind of thinking in order to truly love myself and love other people. And honestly, in order to really love God. I don't think that when we're afraid of something that we can really enter into intimacy and love for that other person.
Or God, right?
Yes.
Absolutely agreed.
And it's a way of looking at ourselves that recognizes we each have different parts inside of us. And those parts have their own beliefs or programming based on our life experiences. Some parts try to prevent pain in our lives by working hard to manage the circumstances and the people in our lives, or to manage us. They might think, for example, that if only we could make people like us or do what we need them to do for us, then we would be happy and avoid pain. Now, there's other parts of us that will spring into action if our other parts are unsuccessful at preventing that pain. What they don't understand is that some of the methods that they want to use to help us get that immediate relief, they can sometimes lead to long-term damage. So when I was trying to explain this to my children, I have some teenagers that were wanting to understand this, and I gave them this analogy of a bus. If you can imagine that you are the driver of the bus and you're driving your bus through life wherever you want to go, and as the driver of our bus, this is my belief, we are interconnected with our creator, and we are whole and complete and resourced just as we are. Our creator did not put ourselves in charge of anyone else's bus, just our own. And he didn't put anyone else in charge of our bus, just us. So we are the driver, connected and at one with our creator, even though some of us may not be aware of that or know that. But the other parts of us are on the bus too. How I was able to sort of wrap my brain around it was that I imagined my other parts with all their ideas and thoughts about how I should manage my life in order to prevent pain, sitting on one side of my bus. And then on the other side of my bus were all of my parts ready to fly into action as soon as I felt a negative emotion. But way in the back seat of the bus are like younger versions of us that are hiding and maybe curled up in the fetal position. And these young parts of us carry all of our pain and past trauma and confusion from all kinds of things that happen in our lives. Being bullied at school, getting lost in a shopping mall as a child, losing a friend in an accident, growing up in poverty or growing up in an overly strict home, or having a parent with a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue, or anything else that would have caused us harm or emotional pain. So the parts on our bus will sometimes disagree with each other about what is the best course of action. They can judge each other. They fight with each other. I used to think that there was something wrong with me because I had all of these opposing thoughts and I couldn't figure out which ones I was supposed to obey. So I kind of saw my inner voices as just more little scary gods in my life, shouting orders and threatening me if I didn't do everything right. But now that I am aware of this, I'm not afraid of these little parts anymore. I can hear these thoughts in my head and I think, oh, these are different parts of me. So that's when I try to slow down and tune in and listen to what each individual part is trying to communicate to me. I'm not listening to something outside of myself. I'm really just listening to my own beliefs and inner thoughts. And if I don't ever slow things down and stop to listen, I'm never going to really know what's going on inside of me. And then I won't have the self-awareness that I need to address these issues that I'm struggling with. These parts of us, they also need an empathetic witness to heal and to find peace and calm in our bodies. And we can be that empathetic witness for ourselves. I think that it's miraculous and comforting to know that our Creator within us also partners with us inside of our core self to be that empathetic witness. So our opportunity and our challenge is to address those parts of us that are confused and hurting and move towards those parts in love and compassion and find out what they believe and then loosen up their thinking a little bit so that those parts of us can experience the warmth and the light and the love that God has for us.
That's beautiful. It's such a good way to describe it. I think that the way you're describing it is way more effective, but I've described it like this. It's competing values because you're like, I need to be safe, but I also want to be obedient. So trying to figure out what the best thing to do is.
Or even like, I need to be safe, but I also want to be vulnerable and have intimacy with someone. How do you get both things? Well, sometimes that depends on the other person. And figuring that out within yourself is so important because you don't want to make yourself vulnerable to someone who you can't be safe with.
Unfortunately, religion didn't really teach us about safety. They taught us about evil in a way that didn't help us be safe. I think about that a lot because there's so many people checking the religious boxes who are actually evil. They're not safe at all. And yet they're religious leaders or they're in that power over dynamic that is so harmful. And so deconstructing all of that, it takes a long time and it really takes listening to yourself.
And we're taught that we can't trust ourselves. It's interesting using the word safety. We're taught to glorify suffering. So when you're not safe, you are suffering. So it's almost like you're glorifying being in a state of unsafety and being in a state of hyperarousal to trauma because that's a spiritual thing to do. And of course, if you think that's a problem, then you must not be trusting God. I just think a lot of beliefs have been put in place by people who have really twisted the Bible or twisted religious thoughts to serve themselves and enable them to abuse people. I started connecting some dots for myself in my own life when I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The first dot I connected was my understanding of what CPTSD was and then how I ended up having it. And there are three things that can trigger CPTSD. One is an uneven power dynamic, which happens with women of faith who are in abusive marriages. There's an uneven power dynamic when you are in a marriage with someone who is powering over you and abusing you. And then the second thing that can cause CPTSD is repetitive, prolonged trauma. So it's not just one single incident, it's years and years of invalidation, criticism, gaslighting, all that kind of stuff happening over a period of time. Death by a million cuts, some people will say, or a million bee stings. And then the third part is the perception that there is no escape. A lot of Christian women, they actually could get out, but they don't think they can because they've been programmed to believe that they're not allowed to get a divorce. So that was dot number one. The second dot, the other missing piece in my life was an empathetic witness to my experiences. Nobody believed me. I felt like I was in a glass bubble for most of my life, like suffocating and screaming and banging on the glass for someone to see me and hear me and let me out. And people would just walk right by and just completely ignore me. So there's a lot of deflection and spiritualizing of abuse and pain in Christian circles. And there's this theology too, in many Christian circles, that men have rights and privileges that women don't have. And also that women are often blamed for a lot of things, like being a stumbling block for men with our bodies, or trying to emasculate men simply because we might have a different opinion or a different thought, or maybe we could be more educated than them or have a better idea than they do. And then we're accused of emasculating them.
Heaven forbid. I was accused a lot of emasculating my ex. So yes.
It's so dehumanizing. I think the only way out of this mess is for the individual woman to find her own voice, power, and autonomy, and to take that back to herself. And I believe now that we do that by turning toward ourselves and becoming that empathetic witness that we have needed our entire lives for ourselves. This is how we heal our inner world. There's a theme also running throughout my life of missing a mother to show me what this looks like. I thought I had a wonderful mother, bizarrely, but as it turned out, she really was never able to heal herself. So she ended up being unable to see or hear or validate my perspective. So part of my healing involved learning how to actually be that mother to myself.
It's very confusing. At church on Sunday, someone said 10 things Jesus never said. And she proceeded to say, listen to yourself is one of the things that Jesus never said. He said, listen to the Spirit. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, I agree with both things. I want to listen to the Spirit, but the Spirit is my inner voice. The Spirit is leading me to truth. And to tell people, don't listen to yourself, listen to God. But then who do they want God to be? The leader of the church who's saying, no, keep your mouth shut, sit down. Or the actual Spirit inside of you that is telling you what's right for you. Sometimes it gets so complex as a believer to think, well, is this me? Is this God? Is this something else? Can you talk about the conflict women feeling that maybe their inner voice is a healthy, safe person to follow, especially if they're getting that type of spiritual abuse?
What is the motivation behind teaching something specific like that? Yes, there's some truth to it, but also someone can be teaching something and have an ulterior motive or a reason, and maybe they aren't even aware of it. So sometimes calling out people's motives is important. When Jesus left the earth, he said, don't worry, I'm going to give you a gift. And it wasn't the Bible. The gift he promised was the Holy Spirit. He said, I'm going to give you a helper who's going to guide you in all things. Each person was given the Holy Spirit inside of them. So I tell people, God is partnering with you in your core. You're never going to get it all right because you've got different parts of you and that are wounded, and as they should be in this world. People are sometimes ask me, why is it that I have all of this trouble in the way I think? And sometimes I make choices I don't want to make. And I'm like, that's because you're just a normal human being. There's nothing wrong with you. You're normal. And God didn't say, I'm going to create all these gods and goddesses. He created humans. And so what is that amazing thing that happens when we can partner with God, with our Creator, in making decisions and moving through life, and also being open to making mistakes? I've got some new grandchildren. They're all under one. My son had triplets, and then my daughter had a baby at the same time. So I've got these 4 babies. They're all almost one. So they're learning how to crawl right now, learning how to stand. But let's say that I was to take my grandchildren, we were going to go in the backyard and hang out. If she tried to walk and she fell, or she tried to climb over something that's too hard for her to climb over, I'm not going to berate her and go, I can't believe you tried to do that. That's so ridiculous. I'm also not going to hold her and not put her down and let her explore and make her own decisions about, I want to go look at this flower. I want to go climb over this rock. As a good grandma, I'm going to love her and put her down and let her explore. And I'm going to be with her. I'm going to be here to catch her when she falls. But our kids are going to fall off their bikes. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to date someone who's the wrong person and end up getting their heart broken. That's part of living this life on earth. And God's not up there going, okay, you're my puppet. I'm going to tell you where to go and what to do. And if you do everything exactly as I say, nothing bad will happen to you. And that's how everyone will know that you are a good Christian. You will make all the right decisions. You will know exactly what decision to make when you come to a fork in the road. That's not true. None of that is true. I wouldn't have ever said that or articulated it like that. But honestly, that's what I believed. And that is very baffling, and it doesn't make any sense. And it does bring a lot of shame then, because when you do make a mistake, like for example, I married someone I thought God wanted me to marry, and it turns out that it was a very, very bad decision. But God was with me through all of it. And I don't look back at that and go, God, why did you make me do that? God didn't make me do that. I made that choice myself based on what I had been programmed to believe at the time about marriage and about my job as a godly person and what I needed to do to fulfill that role. And so I made a choice based on my understanding at that time. And then 25 years later, I made a choice to divorce him based on my more updated understanding of how life works, 25 years later. And I told my kids, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to buy the wrong house that ends up losing its value. You're going to make a bad investment. You're going to take a bad job. You're going to possibly marry the wrong person. But that's okay. That's part of God allowing you this amazing, beautiful privilege of living a life. And you also get to change your mind and pivot anytime that you need to. And we can't always pivot out of everything, but we can pivot out of a lot of things, I think, sometimes. Whenever a hurricane comes through or a tornado comes through or a fire comes through and destroys a community, you will see that 10 years later, that community has been rebuilt. It looks different. It's not the same community anymore. We can rebuild our lives and we can start over when we do make mistakes. And I think God is all in on all of that.
Yeah, that's the reason we came here, to learn and grow.
Exactly.
Just like your granddaughter. You can't do it without doing it.
That's exactly right.
Speaking about learning and growing, one of my jobs and your jobs as a podcaster is to educate people about spiritual and emotional abuse. There's two parts to it. There's the part where you're being spiritually and emotionally abused and you don't know that you are, and your body's reacting to that. And then there's your reactions after you're educated about it and how to deal with it now that you know what you're looking at. How do our bodies react when faced with spiritual or emotional abuse, maybe in both those scenarios?
I began to look back to my experiences growing up, as well as my 25-year marriage to an emotionally and spiritually abusive man. And I finally understood why I reacted in so many different ways to those experiences, which is why I decided to write my book. I wanted to be able to allow those different parts to tell a portion of my story. One of the biggest things I hear Christian women saying about their marriages and their lives is that they're so confused. If we're confused, we can't problem solve. We have to know what the problem is, or we're not going to be able to find a solution. So I learned that I was confused because there were different parts of me who had different ways of thinking about and dealing with the abuse. So one part of me minimized it. I call her Rosie. One part of me exaggerated it and believed I was doomed and my children were all doomed. Another part of me spiritualized it and viewed it as a badge of honor to be an abuse victim for Jesus.
Wow. I've never heard that before, and I have to say it. Okay, this is Natalie's, but I'm quoting her. An abuse victim for Jesus. That is amazing.
I know, it's really sad. It's really sad.
There's so many people who are an abuse victim for Jesus.
They have that badge and they wear it with pride.
Wow.
Yeah. I had this other part. I call her my rude part, and she's my truth teller. My mother used to tell me I was rude. And when I became a teenager, I started seeing things like, for what they really were. And I started calling them out. And I would get in bad trouble for that. But my mom would tell me that I was rude. But rude showed up on a regular basis with her analysis of what was happening. But rude was very outnumbered by all of my other parts. And I had been programmed, from childhood to believe that rude was my rebellious, sinful part. Don't listen to that voice. Rude will get me into trouble. But rude was ultimately the part of me inside of myself who set me free in many ways. So how do our bodies react? Well, I think that depending on which part of us we're blended or flooded with at any given time, our body's going to react that way. So after an abuse incident, like if my husband had just gotten done telling me that everything was my fault and I was a horrible person and basically projecting all the things he did onto me, my melancholy part would just want to die. I had so much self-loathing. I could not please my husband. He insisted everything was my fault and my experiences were all in my head. So I just thought I was going crazy. And the pain in my body was so deep and dark and hurt, so, like physically hurt. I often wished I could just die because it hurt so bad. But then I had this other part of me, I call it freaked. And my freaked part had anxiety about everything. So what that part does in my body is it's constantly on an adrenaline high. It makes me want to overperform to please everyone so that they won't criticize or get angry at me. So I get up in the morning and I'm just like, I got to make sure that the house is clean and I got to make sure I make all these phone calls and I got to make sure I bring a meal to these people and I got to make sure that I homeschool my kids just right and all those things. That was my freaked part. And that's how freaked was showing up in my body. After an abuse incident was over, my rosy part would always kick in and tell me all the things I had to be thankful for and that I should believe the best and I should forgive and forget. And she would encourage another part of me to shut down my memory. And to this day, I have lost huge chunks of my memory. The only reason I was able to write a book was because I kept journals during that time. Although I would tear out pages that described the abuse in detail, which is very unfortunate because it would have been better to have more details. But I believed that love kept no record of wrongs and I loved my husband. So I would write down details as soon as it would happen and then I would tear those out. But Rosie would help. So I experienced some relief almost from the pain. And yeah, all those parts, they all played a role. Not that I was keeping myself in a cycle. It's those rooted beliefs that other people had downloaded into me.
I was about to respectfully maybe disagree. Not that I want to disagree with you at all, because I would like to validate you. But I also was like, well, wait a minute. Was it really you? Or was it what you had been programmed to believe?
Absolutely. That's a really good way of distinguishing it. They were my beliefs, but they had been programmed into me. It would be like a science fiction thing where you take a new baby and you plug these little things into their brain and you download it like a computer. That baby's going to grow up and it's going to do all of the behaviors that it was programmed to do. The only way that that person is going to be set free is if that person is able to access help that takes that old program out and puts in a new program.
Because both of us in our jobs, what we do is to help women see, give them permission to know that it's okay to think that thing that they're pushing against.
That's exactly it. Because we have these parts that are like, I can't believe you think that. Like, why would you think that? That's so dumb to think that. Or I can't believe that you stay. It's so dumb that you stay. No, there's really good reasons why those younger parts of us believe those things. Really good reasons. That number one, they were programmed to believe them, but also, especially when you're a child, you are using strategies as a child to simply survive. You can't just leave your family. You can't divorce your parents. You rely and depend on them for your world. And children tend to view themselves as the problem, and they tend to view their parents as, the gods, and the parents know everything. And so if the parents are projecting their own crap on the child or using the child in different ways, the child will think that that's what the child's role is. And those child parts are still inside of you, fully believing those things. If our adult self looks at those parts and goes, well, that's really dumb. I don't know why you think that. And we have all this inner self-loathing. the part's just going to double down inside of us and go, yep, see, I knew it. I have to hang on to this. We stay because we're scared to death of rocking the boat. We're scared to death of getting kicked out of all the love circles. We believe that if we get kicked out, that we will die. That's what those parts of us believe. And those are really good reasons to stay. We believe that something bad could happen to our children. Really good reason to stay. We have good reasons for believing what we believe. So loosening up, like you said, we both do this work of loosening up those beliefs. They're really beliefs that younger parts of us have inside of us. But if you can move towards those beliefs and understand them and go, makes total sense why you'd think that, and have compassion and curiosity. And I wonder where that belief came from. And I wonder where you learned that. And I wonder how it's been reinforced throughout your whole life, that that's the way that it should be. And I wonder if there's other ways we could look at this that might be more helpful or that might actually set you free or be more life-giving for you.
It's so exciting to see women think about things differently in a way that is good. And when I say in a way that is good, we've been programmed to think that the way we're thinking about like divorce, maybe, or just separating yourself from harm, or maybe even just not making bread. You don't have to make bread. Some women, the second you give them permission, hear something and realize, oh, I didn't know I didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
You know,
when I was in the thick of living in an abusive world all around me, I was gaslit and programmed with the idea that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. So of course there was this tremendous shame and confusion in my body. And I couldn't make sense of the contradictory beliefs. But once I realized that these beliefs were not who I was, they weren't my identity, but rather long-held programming that I acquired through no fault of my own, that's when I could create some distance between me and these parts of me that held these beliefs. And I could look at them with compassion and curiosity and move toward them. Like we mentioned before, just asking them questions about when they started believing that thing and why they hold on to that belief and how they think that belief is keeping me safe. So for example, if I hung on to this belief that there was something wrong with me, then when someone disagreed with me or didn't like me, I could make it about me. Well, that's because there's something wrong with me. And then I could keep continuing to reach out to them and giving them their way. And if I did that, then they would like me and allow me to be in their love circle. I mean, it's so twisted, but I realized that's what I actually do in this dynamic. But if I let go of that belief that there was something wrong with me, well, that kind of scared me, because if I did that, then I might just stand up for what I believed and I might stop giving them their way. And that would get me into deep, deep trouble with other people and they might kick me out. And then if that happened, I would die. There was a part of me that truly believed I would not survive it if I was kicked out. And that is exactly what ultimately happened when I stopped obeying everyone around me. I was maligned, lied about, talked about. I lost my reputation, my credibility, and then I was excommunicated from my church, and my family of origin hasn't talked to me for 5 years. So to this day, I can't even go to a funeral for an extended family member. This recently happened without people turning away from me and shunning me because they believe only God knows what about me. I don't really even know. I had to be willing to lose all of those scary little gods in my life in order to find a big, loving creator God. And I also had to lose all the scary little people in my life in order to find a woman named Natalie. Best decision ever, but man, was it painful.
I love that you bring that up. Like, you lost so much, but you would say you feel better.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things I talk about, I live in the mountains of Utah and I love to ski. And there's a pitch on any run where it looks like it's a cliff. And you have to get kind of close to the edge of that pitch to realize it's not a cliff. It's just the rest of the slope and you can ski down it. That happens in hiking too. You get to it and you think, oh, I can't get close to that. It's a cliff. But then if you look over, you realize, oh no, it's just a slope. It's fine. It's okay. Come look over the pitch. You're going to be safe. The nightmare scenario that you were just terrified of, being excommunicated, having everyone think that you're terrible, that happened. And yet it was what set you free. Would you mind talking about that for a little bit?
Yeah, that analogy is so beautiful. I love it. That perfectly describes my experience with this. A lot of our fear is just fear of the unknown. But once you find yourself actually walking through it on a day-to-day basis, it definitely hurts. It's not like it doesn't hurt, but at least I found that it wasn't quite as bad as I thought it was going to be. As far as it didn't kill me. It was painful, but when I was in that environment, it was almost like I thought that was the whole world. I had to get out of it to realize how I describe it is like, imagine an ocean with a big beach where you can look as far to the right as you want and as far to the left as you want. All you can see is the horizon. So it just goes on forever, it seems like, on the beach even. And then imagine that like the church that kicked me out is a little sandbox on one little part of the beach that's maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. And there's some kids playing in that sandbox. And that was my church. I thought when I was in the sandbox with the kids that that was the world. And when I got kicked out and started wandering on this big beach, feeling lost and alone, what I discovered is that there's all kinds of beautiful people on the beach that were never in that sandbox to begin with. And I am free and I don't have a sandbox anymore. Now I've got miles and miles and miles of beach to explore and other people in the world to get to know. And they don't all have the same beliefs as what the people in my sandbox had. And there's so much relief. I was under so much pressure and stress to be someone that I wasn't when I was in that sandbox. And there was so much threatening. If you do this, then this is what's going to happen to you. And you better do it our way. And you better do A, B, and C. And so there's always that fear. Once I got out on the beach, I was able to run and play. The Bible in Psalms, it talks about setting our feet in spacious places. And that's what I felt like God did. He plucked me out of that sandbox and set my feet in spacious places that I could run and be free and experience more of life than I was ever able to experience. I was always told by the people in the sandbox never to get out. There's danger out there. And, it was just manipulation, right? And lies. And then when they finally just kicked me out, it was like, oh, honestly, that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
I've thought about that a lot with people that don't like me. And I'm like, thank you. I don't have to worry about how I am around you or anything. If you don't like me, that's a gift to me. I mean, I've come to this now. I'm not saying I've been like this forever, but it's very like freeing instead of them saying, well, I'm not going to like you unless you do, this, and this.
Right. Because then you can just be like, okay, then don't like me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a free world.
Great. Problem solved, right? I created a meditation workshop that has 13 meditations that I wrote specifically for abuse victims. And I was concerned because I'm Christian, but some Christian faiths, they don't think that meditation is going to be good for people. And they're worried about it. The meditations I wrote are faith neutral. And if people would like to imagine the white light as Christ, they can do that or not, or, whatever they want to do. But I did sample them with Christian women because I was rightfully concerned that it might offend them or conflict maybe. But as they took it, they were like, no, this was awesome. It completely fit in with my faith, even though I left it spiritually neutral. How does this align with the Christian faith for Christians out there who are maybe nervous about trying something different, especially if they've been spiritually abused?
As far as the Christian faith goes, it's supposed to be about love. And I know that's not what we're seeing in today's modern and very warped version of it that's really full of hate and vitriol and grabbing for power and control. But Christianity, it's called Christian because it's after Jesus Christ. He modeled something very different. He moved toward the outcasts and the lepers and the sick and the poor. He offered peace and forgiveness and grace. He promised to love us and never leave us or forsake us. So Christianity, which is supposed to be this religion that walks in the footsteps of Jesus, should look like that, right? Well, what I discovered and what I talk about in the last part of my book is that just because people don't understand the way of Christ doesn't mean that way isn't available to us. And my job isn't to make other people follow a set of rules or do what I think they should do. My job is to simply walk with Christ myself. And the starting place for that is within me. So instead of criticizing, hating on, beating up, and running away from the parts inside of me who carry darker beliefs or proclivities due to their woundedness or the burdens they carry, I have the opportunity to be like Christ, who I say I follow, and move toward those parts of me with love and compassion and empathy. And when I do that, those parts inside of me unburden from the beliefs that keep them trapped in fear and shame. And then they do get to enter into the light and love of God. The Bible says that love casts out fear. So when we're afraid, that's our opportunity to figure out, why am I afraid? And where am I missing love? Like, where do I need to show myself some love? How can I get myself into safe spaces where I can experience freedom and joy and peace? How can we hold others accountable who are imprisoning and abusing other human beings? How can we offer dignity to ourselves and other human beings wherever they're at on their journey? That's what I do. This is what you're doing. We focus on healing that relationship that we have with our own lost and wounded parts first. And then when they heal, everything changes.
Essentially, in so many cases, a woman, abuse victim, is being oppressed by the entire system, and she is not receiving validation, love, or freedom from oppression, which is what Christ came to do. I mean, he's our savior. I say all the time, he is the deliverer, the savior. He did not come to oppress anyone. He came to save them and deliver them from oppression.
If we're Christians, we're his representatives in the world. So where we're not doing that is where we have deviated from the Christian faith, in my opinion.
I totally agree. That's what worries me, is that there's a whole set of people who are being oppressed, mainly women, who are submitting because they're asked to, but what they're really submitting to is not God. It's not goodness. They're submitting to evil. And it freaks me out.
I really believe that if Christianity supported women getting out of abusive relationships, that would potentially force men to be the people that God created them to be. But they won't. As long as they're not held accountable, as long as we're just going to blame the victims and we're going to enable the abusers, enable men to have these entitlement beliefs that women are supposed to meet their needs and women are supposed to do everything that they need them to do, the men will never heal and the women will always run that risk of being in a bad relationship and having no support to get out.
If their goal is to be an exploiter and to not fill the measure of their creation, they've nailed it.
Yes.
But I don't think that's what God intended for them.
No.
And I think there are many amazing spiritual leaders who would agree with us.
Oh, absolutely. I think it is growing. I know this wasn't a Christian movement, but the Me Too movement, it basically opened up the conversation and it exploded. And now there's all kinds of nuanced conversations happening all over the place. And because Christians like us are standing up and going, this has to stop, and we're calling it out, it has to start on the ground level with individuals. You know, hopefully we'll see more and more women standing up and going, I'm not going to do this anymore. But also it has to happen from the top down as well. And I don't know what's happening up there. That's not my calling, but I definitely think there's work to be done.
I was going to say, are you sure, Natalie? Maybe starting a seminary? I just got revelation for you. I'm kidding.
I'll think about that.
You are amazing. Thank you so much. Check out Natalie's podcast. It's Flying Free, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts. And is your website Flying Free?
Well, it's flyingfreenow.com because I couldn't get Flying Free as a domain. So I was like, okay, fine. Flying Free now.
Now. I like the now. I like it. That's
I do
great.
too.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie. I appreciate you coming on today. If this podcast is helpful to you, please help us reach other women by following or subscribing and giving us a 5-star rating. Thank you for helping other women find us. If you've already purchased a copy of my book, Trauma Mama, Husband Drama, please circle back and give it a 5-star rating. A lot of women are searching for books about betrayal trauma on Amazon, and rating Trauma Mama will help them find this podcast, which is free to everyone. Your donations keep this podcast going. Go to our website, btr.org, scroll to the bottom, click on Support the BTR Podcast. And until next week, stay safe out there.